Welcome to The Jewish Diasporist, a podcast exploring the political, social, and cultural implications of life in diaspora. We are two of your hosts, Ben Yanowitz
and Zach Smarin. For this episode, we spoke with Zandi and Julia, two activists from South African Jews for Free Palestine.
Zach and Jordan had a brilliant discussion with our guests, exploring what a South African Jewish perspective can offer to our present moment.
The South African government has received a lot of global attention for its petition against the Israeli government to the International Court of Justice. However, we wanted to look below the surface to examine the political conditions on the ground and the dynamics within South Africa that have animated the government to take this course of action.
South Africa's history also raises pressing questions regarding the interconnected issues of racism and settler colonialism. These phenomena manifest differently in different contexts. Therefore, in this episode, we only begin to explore this topic in relationship to Jewish identity, and we will certainly be coming back to this theme in subsequent episodes.
Thank you so much to our regular supporters on Patreon and individual donors. Your help is what keeps this podcast going.
Without further ado, we hope you enjoy this conversation.
They will not divide us. We will not abide this. We know that together we'll be free.
Welcome, Julia and Zandi. It's an absolute pleasure to have you on the podcast. Would you both like to introduce yourselves and the organization that you are here representing today? Zandi, if you would like to go first, maybe.
Sure. I'm Zandi Sherman. I'm a member of South African Jews for Free Palestine, which is an organization based here in South Africa of Jews with a diverse set of political positions, but all united around the belief that the Palestinian people are entitled to liberation and return to their land. And we're a collective of anti-Zionist Jews who have really kind of come together and grown as an organization in this moment in response to the current genocide. So I grew up in the progressive Jewish community in Johannesburg. My grandfather was a rabbi and started the progressive congregation in Cape Town. And my mom moved to Johannesburg, where I was raised. And I was raised very deeply embedded in the Jewish community. My mom sings in the shul choir, and so I went to shul every week of my life till I was about 12 or 13. I think after my bat mitzvah, I was like, I'm out of here. But up till then, pretty much every week. And I went to the Netzer camp, which is like the progressive Jewish Zionist youth movement. I would go to camp twice a year. And yeah, so I was sort of grew up very deeply embedded in the Jewish community. And then my life sort of was a bit sort of split in two. I had my Jewish life and then the rest of my life.
Thank you very much. Julia?
Hi, everyone. Lovely to meet you. So I'm Julia Hope, also a member of South African Jews for Free Palestine. I'm quite a recent member. I only joined towards the end of October last year. I actually admittedly had no idea that the organization existed beforehand. And it is an organization that's been around for years. But in my understanding, it has grown maybe even tenfold. People have come and gone over the years, but maybe even tenfold in the past 5 months. I am originally from Johannesburg, where I grew up. I then studied overseas, but I've come back and I'm now studying in Cape Town. And so my involvement with SAJP has predominantly been from the Cape Town base, which is also, I think, is particularly the Cape Town side of the organization that has gotten a lot stronger over the past 5 months, because I think originally it was quite a lot stronger in Johannesburg. My relationship to Judaism, so my mum is Jewish and my dad is not, although I did have a bat mitzvah, and that was probably growing up where my strongest ties to Judaism were. I had quite a progressive feminist teacher for these bat mitzvah lessons, and I completely loved it. I remember at that point in time, I felt a lot more attached to Judaism than even my mum did. She was quite cynical. I was born into the Orthodox Jewish community, and my mum was quite skeptical of the kind of gender conservatism in the shul, whereas I felt a lot more open-minded and excited by the spirituality offered through my bat mitzvah lessons. And I didn't go to a Jewish school, which means I never had, honestly, what is almost 100% of Jewish schools in the country, quite a Zionist influence, which I am quite grateful for, but it did always mean that there was a bit of a disconnect between myself and my cousins. I went to an Anglican all-girls private school in Johannesburg. And so my Jewish identity in that position, I think, was something that I often would play unintentionally as a diversity card because a lot of the white girls were Christian. And so it's something that I found quite a lot of pride in. And chatting to my mum, it was something that she was always ashamed of growing up. She said that it was only like on the 5th date or something that she told my dad that she was Jewish. And that's just something that I could never kind of grasp or understand because I didn't grow up with any shame around that part of my identity. But yeah, I could go on, but...
Thank you very much.
Thanks for introducing yourselves and your organization. Zandi, you mentioned that there's quite a lot of diversity of opinions within the South Africa Jews for a Free Palestine, but that you're also generally very anti-Zionist. Could you go a little bit into depth on like kind of the ideological diversity, the Jewish diversity found within your organization?
Julia, I don't know if you agree with me that anti-Zionism is like kind of foundational. Yeah, I think so. I think there's diversity in a lot of ways. One is that some people are kind of long-standing anti-Zionists and some are recently recovering from Zionism. I think that people's relationship to Israel is different. Some people feel a tie to Israel that might be related to like family or just this kind of long-standing, I don't know, the process of indoctrination that you go through. So I think that people have different relationships to Israel, different ideas about what a political solution might look like. We have disagreement about how we should or shouldn't talk about Hamas. We're constantly grappling with different questions about kind of what position the organization should take, what issues the organization has a responsibility to take a position on when it's time to say nothing. There's very few things that we all agree on, but I think there's also an incredible amount of solidarity and a sense of kind of shared political purpose and alignment because of how rare it is, at least in South Africa, to be Jewish and anti-Zionist and openly critical of Israel.
Yeah, I think it's tricky because, you know, we've recently been through a series of workshops finalizing our constitution as an organization, which was mediated in quite a long process. And we do have these things in our constitution. We're an anti-Zionist organization. We believe in a free Palestine. On paper, we believe in a single state solution. But I think what's tricky and where disagreement comes in is that if we view anti-Zionism as a journey and we have to meet people at different places, I think it's reaching different or meeting people where they're at in terms of their understanding of what Zionism is and therefore what anti-Zionism is. And I think it's been very interesting for certain things that maybe people that have been less exposed to sort of Hasbara propaganda or less indoctrinated or less immersed in specific Zionist communities, it's easy for them to take for granted that we're an anti-Zionist organization. But it's obviously, that term itself is obviously also quite triggering and visceral if the illogical conclusion that they're drawing is that anti-Zionism equals no right to Israel must equal death to Jews, which, you know, is not obviously what we're calling for, but anti-Zionism in the belief that there should not be an ethno-national Jewish homeland and that there is the right for Palestinians to return and the right for Palestinian liberation on their own land. Those are kind of points that we do need to talk through and are continually talking through.
Thank you. I just want to extend this more into your particular context in South Africa, where there's a long history of colonialism, of racial oppression and apartheid. How does your context in South Africa, your relationships to that country, your relationships to the current government, how does this inspire or guide your Palestinian solidarity activism?
So I think this ties obviously directly into the question of Jewishness and whiteness, tied to the way the memory of the Holocaust is constructed, the way Jewish identity is constructed. There's this notion of Jewish exceptionalism, kind of separate from and worse, but kind of more insidious and more targeted and than any other form of oppression and colonialism and racism. And it's interesting to be speaking as a white South African Jew or from the perspective of the Jewry in white South Africa, because I think this exceptionalism obviously plays a very specific role in how the Jewish community, the white Jewish community in South Africa perceives itself. There's an anecdote that is often passed around, and it is a true story, whether it was as kind of clear-cut as this or not. There was a conversation that happened between the South African Jewish Board of Deputies and the Apartheid government before 1948. And it was kind of this agreement that was, okay, well, Jews will not be included in the racial stratification in a kind of inferior position to white people. and in return, the SHABD must kind of support apartheid. And an interesting, I'll kind of reference Stephen Friedman here. He's a South African Jewish philosopher or thinker. His take on this is that because Jews kind of achieved whiteness in South Africa, but there was an ongoing kind of Anglo-Saxon anti-Semitism, it's this tricky, precarious position of kind of white supremacist privilege while simultaneously not being allowed into these Anglo-Saxon country clubs or nor being able to attain positions of political power, which in his opinion and quite logically fuels a right-wing position and attitude. If I can just give another anecdote, it's very interesting as well to hear discussions around Jews in South Africa framing themselves as people of color. Often gives an ahistorical account of white people's position in South Africa, and obviously is quite violent in that position as well. I was on the beach with a Palestinian flag the other day, and there was a couple of white Zionists on the beach. I do assume that they were Jewish, kind of pulling Zap signs, and I kind of just walked past and said, look, we're all Jewish here, and like walked past. And they said, this is what white privilege is. This is white privilege, kind of pointing us out. And it was very interesting to kind of see that self-perception of victimhood through the lens of, I don't want to say blackness, but non-whiteness, which speaks to the extent to which Jewish victimhood is so ingrained to the point that people can't see past that and cannot see other intersecting forms of privilege, particularly in the settler colonial country. So yeah, I mean, Zandi, you can obviously speak more to that as well.
Thanks, Julia. There's two things that I think of. The one is that I grew up anti-Zionist. My mom was anti-Zionist, partly because she visited her sisters in Israel and made an effort, because she was part of the anti-apartheid movement here in South Africa, made an effort to try and look at Israel from a different lens than the Zionist framework she was raised in, and felt that there were parallels between what she experienced as apartheid in South Africa and in Israel. And so my anti-Zionist education was always linking what was going on in Israel to South African history. It was always framed in that way. And as we know, Zionists hate the comparison of apartheid Israel and apartheid South Africa. And a lot of that focuses on the ways in which Israel doesn't conform to some of the more visible symbols of apartheid in South Africa. So the fact that they aren't Jews only signs, or the fact that some Palestinians with Israeli citizenship have the right to vote. But I think that actually points to why it's useful to think about apartheid South Africa and Israel alongside one another, and to think about, particularly in this moment, I think South Africans are called to think about what the real structures of apartheid were now that we're in a moment where the legal structures have crumbled. But the reality that the majority of Black South Africans continue to be dispossessed of their land, marginalized economically, etc., means that there's a lot to think about. What were the structures that defined apartheid? What was the violence that defined apartheid? And in that way, there's lots of structures that are parallel with Israel, even if some of the more visible symbols of overt racism that were acceptable in that era, or were unacceptable in that era, but you could get away with in that era in a way that you could never now. Even if those symbols aren't there, the kind of structures of dispossession, of marginalization, and of racial capitalism that defined apartheid in South Africa still define South Africa and are very much kind of underpinning the Israeli regime. So I think in one way, kind of thinking of the two places together has always been kind of my framework for anti-Zionism, but also there's just an incredibly strong Palestine solidarity movement in South Africa. South Africans are in touch with the ways in which the struggle in South Africa against racial capitalism is linked to the struggle for Palestinian liberation and struggles against racial capitalism and settler colonialism all over the world. And so I think in South Africa in particular, that way of thinking about the parallels, both the material interconnectedness of settler colonial projects everywhere and the ways in which they function in parallel, is very central to how Palestinian solidarity is thought about, understood, made sense of in the context of South Africa. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I have lots to say about the way in which a sense of fragility, vulnerability, and kind of a constant victim position is central to how Jewishness, as kind of constructed in service of Zionism as a political project, has been construed. And that's certainly my experience in South Africa. You know, we often talk about people as liberal on everything except Israel. And I don't think you can be a liberal Zionist. I don't think you can be a liberal fascist, except if that helps us to think about how fascism and liberalism are actually deeply entwined. In that sense, maybe it's useful. But in my experience, actually, I always experienced Zionism as deeply entrenched with anti-Blackness in South Africa. And the example that I think of, this is very much like from lived experience and like childhood experiences of, for example, the CSO, which is like the Community Security Organization or something. It's like the Jewish private security or community security body. I don't know what its makeup is. I don't know how it's funded, but it's like this body that like is present at shuls, at Jewish day schools, and at like the youth movements and things like that. And through encountering them, I just have this like memory of being on one of these youth camps that I was talking about. The way that the community security organization person came and like gave this presentation about how we must be careful. This is one that stands out, but this is like the whole vibe. It was like, we need to be careful. They're after us. And the they was like very unclear. It was very clear that like the they that we needed to be scared of was like the brown and black other. At that point, we were in Durban. It was in the context of like South Africa, but it was always closely intertwined with the threat of the Muslims. And that kind of racial other as a threat, I experienced the imbrication of anti-Blackness in South Africa and a Zionist sense of the threatening other. And so as I came to learn about the imbrication of support between the Zionist state and the apartheid state, it made perfect sense to me that both thought of themselves as an island of white civilization surrounded by a threat of brown and black others. And so, yeah, I mean, whenever I hear this kind of liberal on everything against Zionism, I get it. I get what people are trying to speak to, but I'm also so aware of the deep imbrication, at least in the South African example or in the South African case, of a kind of anti-black threatening other and a Zionist project of protection, isolation from a perceived threat, both security threat and like existential threat to our way of life, which is better.
That reminds me of a South African state guidebook saying that both South Africa and Israel are lights of civilization surrounded by dark peoples. This was around a similar time when B.J. Vorster, the apartheid prime minister and attempted Nazi collaborator, was visiting Israel with much sympathies. It's from Ben White's book, Israeli Apartheid, A Beginner's Guide. I'd like to shift gear, though, just a little bit to talk about specifically the politics of South Africa as a country in 2024. And I'm going to be a bit inspired here by a recent article by Conrad Landin in the most recent New Internationalist, Africa's Pandora's Box. The New Internationalist edition just came out a few days ago. This is not a sponsorship. I have been a subscriber for a while. It's a very good source, I think. This year, it's election season in South Africa. There's a significant probability that the ANC could for the first time lose its parliamentary majority. And a lot of this has to do with a lot of socioeconomic problems that are taking place in South Africa right now. According to World Bank data, South Africa is now the most unequal country in the world. There continue to be significant racial disparities and segregation. There's a lot of talk about endemic corruption, especially around Eskom, the energy provider, and rolling blackouts. That's reached international news. On the Labour front, there are still the echoes of the Marikana massacre, with Cyril Ramaphosa, who was then the president of the complicit Confederation of South African Trade Unions, who's now president of the country. And on the question of indigenous rights as well, there's recently been issues around the River Club development in Cape Town, which, for those who don't know, Amazon Africa HQ wants to set up on traditionally indigenous Khoi and San land. And there's even in the Landin article, there's a quote by one of the local indigenous leaders, Tariq Jenkins, that while South Africa may have overcome the state of apartheid, we are nowhere near to conquering the apartheid state. They even try and draw connections between the situation in Gaza and the Cape Flats, which is where a significant part of Cape Town's so-called coloured population have been segregated towards. And so I guess from a cynical perspective, I know in the Cape Province, the opposition, much more right-wing Democratic Alliance, is in power. But I guess the cynical perception of this may be that the South African government, in very much coming out on an international stage towards denoting solidarity with Palestinians, with the situation in Gaza and the claim of genocide in the ICJ, that it may serve as some sort of way of rallying around the population on an issue that does not take into account a lot of the significant problems within South Africa as a whole. This isn't to say that campaigners for issues like in the Cape Flats or on the Amazon HQ development displacement of indigenous land aren't themselves connecting the struggles. But how would you do it from your perspective? How would you directly connect the struggles that are underway in Palestine and South Africa? And how do you relate to the South African government itself in regards to these two areas of struggle?
If this is an election ploy, I don't think it'll work. South Africans' disillusion with the state runs deep, and I feel incredibly conflicted about how to celebrate the fact that there have been some really incredible, brave political moves made by our government that I feel both an amount of respect for, and when I see how meaningful they are to Palestinians, feel that there's a sense that this is an important political moment globally, an important kind of message. And at the same time, it's impossible to forget that the South African government has continued and is complicit in and continues the dispossession of the majority of South Africans who were dispossessed by the apartheid state. And not only hasn't changed the dynamics of, for example, placing the interests of capital at the heart of politics as opposed to the interests of people, but has also in some cases actually expanded that investment in, for example, continuing to have an extractive-based economy, dispossessing people of land in order to open new extractive projects, mines, etc. So it's impossible to forget that the South African state is continuing this kind of dispossession. And on the other hand, I think it is important to say we need, in a global system where Israel is garnering a huge amount of support from global powers, it is really important for states to stand up and say something and to take a political stand. And so I think it's incredibly complex to speak about what something like the ICJ means, because on the one hand, the whole global legal framework is actually complicit in and part of settler colonial structures, is born out of them, reproduces ideas of Western liberal humanity and its others. To take a political stance on something like South Africa going to the ICJ or taking the kinds of stands it is really complicated and really difficult. And I think sometimes what's necessary, what's important, what's politically useful, and what's kind of ethical and what you can agree with kind of in a deep political sense sometimes don't align easily. Yeah, and so I think that's how I feel about kind of how to make sense of the South African government taking the stances that it does. And to say that it's not that the South African government has always only taken excellent stances on the question of Israel. I mean, that's far from the case. I was just reading about, in preparation for this conversation, reading about how the South African police service continue to buy armored vehicles from the same Israeli company that supplied armored vehicles to the apartheid government. So, I mean, like, the layers of contradiction are many, and I don't think you can kind of have a simple stance on that question.
Directly on that, the wall was actually built by a company based here in South Africa, which is the Paramount Group. Paramount maybe produces arms, but the Kaplan Foundation, which is a Jewish fund, the Jewish Studies Center at UCT, was involved in the construction of the wall in a capacity that I'm not 100% sure about. Please do fact check me on that, but that is what word on the street is. Very controversially so. I have a lot to say on this point. It's been so transparent and so blatant the way that political parties are mobilizing around the Palestinian cause. So I don't think it's by no means merely cynical, it's also completely honest. I mean, the biggest march that happened in South Africa in the last 5 months, I think in the last maybe few years, 10 years, I want to say, was 20,000 people plus. The MJC, the Muslim Judicial Council, claimed that it was 200,000. It was less. In Cape Town, you just see so much political pandering and posturing from the ANC, from the Democratic Alliance based in the Western Cape, from the EFF. And their use, I think, it's a particular manipulation and instrumentalization of South African Jews for a Free Palestine in particular. And this has been something that we really need to grapple with, because I think our organization and our voice as Jews can be very useful and emboldening. For example, the Minister of Foreign Affairs and International Relations did kind of mention us in one of her press statements. This is Naledi Pandor. So in that instance, it was very emboldening because the Jewish voice is completely monopolized and co-opted by the South African Jewish Board of Deputies, which is Zionist and other Zionist organizations. And so in my opinion, it's very useful and strategic to have this alternative Jewish voice and for that to be used in whatever kind of ways needed to open new trajectories towards Palestinian solidarity and resistance. However, it is equally as often, or probably more often, used just for votes. There was an instance in which there was a planned Zionist rally at the Seapoint Promenade, and at this big march, Mandla Mandela, Nelson Mandela's grandson, if I'm not mistaken, of the ANC, kind of said, okay, well, we'll just show up there en masse to resist these Zionists. And along with all of the pro-Palestinian supporters, also showed up the riot police, which of course is very, very triggering for people of color because it's the same vehicles that were used during the apartheid regime. And you kind of have Mandla Mandela standing on one of these vehicles saying, okay, we've done what we needed to do, now everyone go home. He took absolutely no responsibility for what happened and kind of used it as well, ANC is taking more action than others. It was a shit show that day. Various other factions and political voices or people trying to make kind of opportunists. Yeah, I don't know. And then you see, for example, the Democratic Alliance, who has stood by its two-state solution line like consistently. So maybe they're like the only unwavering political voice in this. Yet nonetheless, organized a football match at the stadium here in Athlone in Cape Town with a Palestinian football team and the South African under-19 football team and a Western Cape team, and the mayor's face is on the front of it. And it's kind of like the message of the match was Free Palestine, but then the message of the organization, of the party organizing it and enabling it, is not at all Free Palestine. And they, time and time again, have chosen to kind of appease their Zionist supporters and also funding. The person in South Africa, in my understanding, who funds or who contributes the most to any political party is directly affiliated with Israel, and funds that are going to the Israeli state, and I want to say the IDF. Those funds in South Africa are going to the Democratic Alliance. There are direct money trails between political parties in South Africa and Israel, particularly the Democratic Alliance. And I wanted to comment on the ANC. I was honestly very shocked about the ICJ case. It was seemingly kind of, with like no barriers, just went ahead with no kind of resistance from the executive. Whereas a month before that, the ANC and Department of International Relations had announced that they had already withdrawn all of their ambassadors, but they were going to close the Israeli embassy here. And then made this big announcement, and then it was towards the end of the kind of financial year, and there was some bureaucracy that needed to happen, and strategically, because it was the end of the year, that discussion never happened. And so the embassies actually never closed. The Israeli ambassadors were just withdrawn. And so it's this kind of backdoor appeasing of international interests, which is American and British predominantly in terms of our trade, that to me is quite transparent and ongoing. The executive and political parties have had very little to say about BDS, which I think would be the most obvious and next kind of stage in South Africa's solidarity with Palestine, because we have so much Zionist money coming in and out of the country. Also, I don't know how known of a fact this is, but a significant proportion of IDF soldiers are straight out of South African schools, Jewish and not Jewish schools, which is illegal. It can be prosecuted under South African law. Even expressing support for someone to go and support a foreign military is illegal. And so for years, this could have been taken up by the National Prosecuting Authority, but it hasn't been. And now there are teams of lawyers working on it, but there haven't at least been any public big gestures towards this. Finally, to get to your question about what should solidarity look like, or genuine and authentic solidarity, I think, and I've been completely moved just by the grassroots organizing that's happening on the ground and the non-political party stuff. There were many screenings organized of the ICJ hearing, but the spirit of these hearings and the messaging was, this is great, but now look at this possession here, and now look at forced removals here. There was a People's SONA, so this SONA is the State of the Nation address, which takes place in South Africa's parliament in Cape Town every single year at the beginning of the year, and the president speaks and announces kind of plans for the year. And there was a People Sonar organized, and this isn't a plug, but I am part of this other organization called the Cape Youth Collective, organized by the Cape Youth Collective in coordination with other organizations, and it took place just nearby Parliament, kind of just as a rejection and an expression of our disillusionment with party politics. And people from the Housing Assembly, which is a kind of grassroots movement for better housing in Cape Town, and other organizations came together just to express this discontent. And so it's these forms of solidarity and messaging that have been very, very powerful here. I don't know, I mean, there are genuinely countless examples. For example, there's a screening happening this Saturday that SAJFP is involved with by a local filmmaker called Cecilia Manzini about land dispossession in Cape Town, or land dispossession in Cape Town, and its message is for lamentation and mourning about dispossession, forced removal, and genocide that happened here and in Palestine. So there is this continual kind of link that's drawn. And I think it's also quite a bleak and maybe cynical statement to say, but Palestinian solidarity has really fed and emboldened and bolstered activism here on the ground, which is obviously amazing for community work here. But in terms of our contributions to Palestinian resistance and liberation, there's obviously a more bleak view on that.
Thank you so much. I think that your voices in this regard are expressing views that don't really reach. We don't see outside much of the perspectives within South Africa itself, and we really appreciate that. It's sometimes just reduced, that South Africa, the government does something, therefore this is South Africa, like presents in that way. I think I just want to make a point regarding, in terms of making claims about funding and stuff like that. I believe you, we believe you, but if it's possible for you to give us citations for sources that we can then include in the description, that would be very appreciated, in case then we don't run into trouble in that regard.
When Julia was speaking, something that I thought about, despite Julia's mention of the upcoming film screening, which I think is fantastic, I think that one of the questions that SAJFP needs to grapple with is what it means to be an organization of predominantly white South Africans who are advocating for the liberation of the Palestinian people in a context where many of them continue to live on the spoils of apartheid in South Africa. And my mom's been a member of SAJFP for many years, more than a decade. And one of the reasons that I kind of didn't get involved was because I felt quite disillusioned about that contradiction. What does it mean to be meeting in the living rooms of our homes in the white leafy suburbs of Johannesburg at the time, and talking about what it means to show up for liberation in Palestine? And I think I've maybe softened my position a little bit since then, but I do think that for Jews across the world who live in settler colonies, there are questions to ask about what it means to feel incredibly committed to Palestinian liberation and how to connect that to a commitment to being part of unsettling the land on which you live. And I think in this moment, with what's going on in the midst of a genocide, maybe that's not the moment to foreground that conversation. I'm not sure. But I do think that if the organization wants to kind of go forward in a way that is aligned with the political values that underpin speaking up for the liberation of Palestine, then we really do need to grapple with what it means to do that from the position of immense privilege in relation to the rest of the country, and privilege that is not acontextual, but privilege that comes from decades of extraction of wealth from the indigenous people of South Africa. So yeah, I just wanted to add that. I think it's an important thing for all Jewish anti-Zionist organizations to grapple with in contexts like ours.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's an excellent point, and something that we here at the Jewish Diasporist are also struggling with. And I know a lot of our other partner organizations have been really trying to figure out how can we decenter whiteness and privilege within our Judaism and elevate the minoritized and discriminated others that we're complicit in the marginalization of. As a person who's grew up in the settler colony of the US, where we're taught a very ahistorical narrative of how this country came to be, I think telling these stories and building bridges and trying to recognize how our white passing privilege within this position allows us to speak up and be seen when other people who have been speaking up and trying to be heard have been, almost intentionally left off the map. How can we reach out and make this space more inclusive and elevate other voices that really need to be heard in this position. And especially in the fallout of October 7th, there is a increasing urgency of how can we unite these struggles against settler colonialism while also preserving an ethical Judaism. And that's something I personally, and I know many others probably listening, have been really struggling with.
Yeah, and one of the traps of like the conflation of Zionism and Judaism is the fact that you're now in a position where it seems to be politically useful to speak as a Jew, but Jewish voices are also getting this really problematic, or are being kind of like pushed to the forefront in ways that are really problematic. Jewish experience, we're talking more about anti-Semitism. We're having more conversations about the ways in which Jewish people are or aren't victimized, do or don't feel afraid, et cetera, in a moment where what we really need to be doing is foregrounding Palestinian voices. And it really is, I mean, like, it feels like an intractable trap of this conflation of Zionism and Judaism.
Mentioned quite a bit on the Jewish community in South Africa today, in terms of how it's organized, in terms of institutions. From the outside world, the primary thing that most people associate Jewish community in South Africa to be is Lithuanian. That's sort of the main connection of it being, and not too much else in terms of understanding it. And so the question I find is, in terms of the community today as a whole, how do you engage with the members of the more mainstream institutions in general? Do you actively try and engage within these spaces, with members of these spaces, or do you rather try and build sort of alternative of it? I saw that there was an op-ed that SAJFP wrote, South African Jews did not vote for Jewish organizations to represent us. I think this is something that is very much in Britain. There is also a board of deputies, and it is also claims to represent the majority of the Jewish community, and it also, or at least from what I know, is highly undemocratic in terms of how it's organized. But then that sort of begs the question then, if there is to be organizing within the Jewish community, do you try and do that through an organization that has a democratic voice and within which that struggle can take place, and one within which that vision of a Jewish community can be articulated in a positive way, one in which there are many, many different struggles that are underlined, of which Israel-Palestine is one of, but not the only one, right? I think that's something that people who try and work from the perspective of resurrecting or bringing forth a new idea of what the Jewish Labour Bund was historically into the 21st century try to do, and something that in contexts like within my community in Poland, where there is an active effort towards rebuilding Jewish communal life, and which at the very least in implications, if the majority of the community does not agree with it, but at least I think in implications comes against this idea of Jewish culture and communal fulfillment being centered around a Jewish state. And I'm also going to mention, since Ben, who isn't here but very much interested in the conversation, wanted me to mention an article about the history of the Bund and Jewish socialist organizing in South Africa in the early years of the 20th century, and some quite inspirational words and acts that you could see there around Jewish labor organizing, very much breaking down barriers of color and nationality and ethnicity in those years. And so is this something that you're trying to draw inspiration from towards a more positive vision of that kind? What is the relationship with the mainstream Jewish communal institutions and just people within them? Because even if the South African Board of Deputies was elected, if it was, I assume that the majority of the Jewish community would have generally quite Zionist and, at least to some extent, Zionist and reactionary visions. So how do you grasp with that? How do you grasp with these ideas?
In my understanding, even the camps that posture themselves as very leftist, or liberal in inverted commas, I also don't like that word, Zandi, or not the word, but the aspiration. In my understanding, even such camps that would describe themselves as quite left-leaning, whether it's by ideology or by kind of tied aid and finances, are very Zionist. And maybe they present themselves as liberal Zionists, but Zionist nonetheless. And, you know, there are spaces of community building which are very, very powerful, especially for young kids. either kind of already quite involved in the community or those feeling at odds, it can be a very powerful experience and therefore very dangerous when that is kind of a pipeline to joining the least moral army in the world. I did want to speak to when you say the question of forming alternative Jewish community that is not focused on, maybe that's more with a diasporist ethic and less focused on Israel. The only time I've experienced that explicitly, I don't want to say the only time, but the most powerful time has been through interfaith spaces and the Shabbats for Palestine that have been organized over the past 5 months, and they've been happening every single Friday night. I've never felt more connected to my Jewish identity and my spirituality and the community. And not only because we agree ideologically and politically, but because that's the kind of space I think we want to foster as Jews, a space that is ethical and holding and caring. And quite frankly, there's a kind of paranoia, at least how I perceive it, in other spaces that can't come to terms with the fact that Zionism is an evil to Judaism. And I think, and I imagine that a lot of this caring and world building, community building is lost by that kind of imposed blind spot, because you can't create a space of justice without speaking to the injustices that are happening in your name. I'm sorry if that's quite like a reductionist perspective. I don't know, Zandi.
About the mainstream organizations, I think my perception has been that a lot of what happens with SAJFP is trying really hard not to respond to every single one of the really frustrating, racist, untrue, fucked up things that the South African Jewish Board of Deputies puts out. We're constantly trying to figure out when is the right moment to respond and when is it a moment to not let them dominate the conversation. Because one of their tactics, a member of ours, Josh Marcus, wrote something fantastic pointing out that they're constantly trying to bring the conversation back to Jewish people and to make it a conversation about Jewish people and to prevent us having the conversation we need to be having, which is about Palestine and what's happening in Palestine and what's happening to Palestinian people. So I think there's a tactical question about how much you do respond when you do respond, particularly because they claim to speak in the name of all Jews. But you're absolutely correct that the majority of Jewish South Africans do identify as Zionist. We don't know how big that majority is. There's definitely an effort to make it seem like it's more hegemonic than it is. That's one of the tactics. But it's certainly the case that Zionism is widespread. SAJFP doesn't currently do any direct outreach through mainstream Jewish institutions. I don't think that would be a very good way of spending our time. I'm not sure it would be very successful, and I think we would receive a huge amount of abuse. But what I do hope we do is create a space where people who already feel alienated feel that they can come and explore an alternative to the mainstream position. I don't know, I can't say, but I haven't experienced an effort to build larger Jewish community outside of a focus on Israel and also kind of not defined by position on Israel, but thinking more broadly about how a Jewish ethic can relate to our politics. That's not something that I've experienced, but I will echo what Julia said. I think for me, I've been incredibly alienated from my Jewish identity because of the amount of racism I experienced, because of my disillusion with Zionism, and being involved in SAJFP has been a moment to return to a sense of community that I last had at the very Zionist youth movements that kind of put me off. But that as a young person, I felt very connected and in a space of deep belonging and community, despite all of the problems that I was referencing before. And I think that some moments that I've had with SAJFP have been moments of feeling reconnected to that. And I hope that maybe we can start to reimagine how we can build a broader leftist Jewish community that kind of makes space for anti-Zionism, but that isn't defined by it, and thinks more broadly about what it means to move ethically and what our Judaism can offer to our kind of politics.
Julia, you said you wanted to speak about the Amazon development.
Before we were speaking about funding, I forgot the name. So it's martin-moshal. It doesn't take very long to do some fact finding. I literally just type in his name. And he's listed on various sites as the #1 funder to South African parties, including the Jewish Report. So they kind of present this quite proudly. But then you search martin-moshal Zionist, and he's listed on the Keren Hayesod page, which is one of the biggest Israeli charities. And I think that may be more or less known, Karen Hayesod and also charities in general, is a way that people hide behind their funding to the IDF. So one of the biggest boycotts happening in South Africa at the moment is against Cape Union Mart, owned by Philip Kravitz, who has come out as one of the proudest donors to Israel, specifically to Karen Hayesod, which is known. I think how it works is that there's often a donation to the charity, and then the charity kind of disperses it to various ends, including IDF, whatever that may be, military assistance. So there's a very, very blatant link between funding of political parties in South Africa and Zionist organizations. I'm sure the exact details could be kind of unpacked or found out there. Then in terms of the River Club, just because I know that's Zach, you wanted one of us to speak to it, on the topic of solidarity across South Africa and Palestine. So one of the most obvious talking points is that Palestinians are experiencing apartheid to the same or more extreme extents that Black South Africans and South Africans of color experienced under apartheid South Africa. One of the really important roles and positions of the indigenous groups that have also been mobilizing for Palestine, for example, Save Our Sacred Lands, which is headed by Tarek Jenkins that you mentioned. It hasn't been kind of demonstrated in international law, but South Africans and indigenous South Africans also experienced a genocide, and no one acknowledges this, and there have been no reparations or coming to terms with this. And so that has been really, really powerful in kind of fostering solidarity and also coming to terms with the fact that these indigenous peoples have gone through 300 years of ethnic cleansing and continue to do that today, where their very limited and fragmented existing pieces of land are bought and sold off to international corporations like Amazon, especially corporations that are complicit in genocide and Israeli apartheid and are being boycotted internationally through movements such as No Tech for Apartheid. I can give an anecdote to that. There was a protest outside the German embassy, and Tarek Jenkins was there and various other organizations were there, like interfaith organizations, Jewish organizations, the Palestine Solidarity Campaign, and a representative or a figurehead of the German embassy was sent to appease the crowd. I don't know what. It wasn't the ambassador, but he did look very, very ridiculous, kind of standing outside in a suit, clapping as we were protesting outside the embassy. And Tarek Jenkins sent him, I'll get the name wrong, but a form of a plant that was burnt, kind of a nice smelling plant, which was one of the indigenous practices. And it just looked so ridiculous to see this German representative or the representative of the German embassy standing there while people are kind of describing the atrocities that happened in the genocide in Namibia, that the German consulate in Cape Town is on stolen land in District 6, which is one of the most contentious spaces and sites in Cape Town where people were forcibly removed, and obviously the Holocaust as well. And so I think it's moments like those that really, like, very affectively and effectively bring to the fore these connections and the fact that the Holocaust, South African apartheid in Palestine and the genocide in Palestine and genocides across Africa are a continuity of white supremacy and colonialism. And I think that has been, a very, very powerful thing to see in the solidarity movements here.
I want to just thank you all for having this conversation with us. I just wanted to have a little open space for either of you to talk about what you think Jews across the global diaspora might take and learn from your context, your own experiences, or just the broader apartheid regime and history of South Africa.
I will speak to that, but I just thought of something that I wanted to say something about, which is like a little bit about the relationship between Jewishness and whiteness in South Africa. And there's a kind of important nuance or maybe even contradiction that we need to sit with, which is the way in which the conservatism of the South African Jewish community is undoubtedly rooted in part in the anti-Semitism that was central to the Afrikaner nationalist project, and as Julia pointed out, to kind of the Anglo-Saxon. So both kind of axes of white power in South Africa had anti-Semitism at their heart. And that is undoubtedly part of the kind of investment in whiteness, the like hyper investment in whiteness that you see in the South African Jewish community, being at the fringe of that whiteness, I think felt like a very precarious and complicated position. And the response was to kind of invest even more deeply in the structure. And I think it's important to acknowledge that. And I think it's also important to acknowledge this in relation to a bigger question around how trauma is tied up with investments in Zionism. I think it's important to acknowledge that many projects of fascism, settler colonialism, and nationalism have really complicated factors, or many people's investments in settler colonialist projects and fascist projects, etc., come from different complicated places, including places of trauma. And I think sometimes we do this is like a form of Jewish exceptionalism. Our version of investment in whiteness comes from a place of trauma, unlike other whiteness, which just comes from like being evil or something, right? And I think it's important to think about how to both acknowledge that it's absolutely true. I mean, if you've had an experience of Zionist propaganda, you know that an investment in the idea of being victims of the Holocaust, whether you do or don't have family connections to the Holocaust, it's like overinvestment in the Holocaust as a personal trauma to yourself is very much part of the pipeline to Zionism. And it's important to acknowledge that and to think about what role that plays. And it's also important to acknowledge that like investments in fascism and the current Israeli state and how it functions are also about investments in accumulation, in access to power. And it's not just from a place of trauma that this happens. It is also from a place of self-interest. It's important not to ignore that role, but also not to kind of speak as if it's an exceptional position that only Jews have ever invested in projects of like ultranationalism, fascism, etc., from a place of trauma. And I think that in thinking about the relationship between Zionism and whiteness and investments in other settler colonial projects around the world, these are like really important questions for us to grapple with.
And maybe it's less so from a Jewish perspective, but what can South Africans say to liberations across the world? There's a book that came out this time last year, Landwalks Across Palestine and South Africa, produced by people at the Bruzate Museum and actually at UCT. So it really does, and it's an artistic intervention. So there's architects, poets, theorists all contributing to grappling with the ties between South Africa and Palestine. And at this talk, an audience member kind of stood up in the panel discussion and was like, honestly, if anything, Palestine must just learn what not to do in their liberation from South Africa, because there was no South African liberation. There was a political transition. I don't think it should have been a lot easier to say maybe a year ago, but now all we want and need right now is a ceasefire and an end to the siege. So it's maybe not the time and place to be saying this, but as we've seen from South Africa, there is no neoliberal solution to end a colonial project. And the same can't happen in Palestine if we want true and just liberation. It's not a matter of Palestine learning from South Africa. And I've also seen a lot of Palestinian activists getting quite upset. I know it was a poster, quite a famous protest poster depicting Vietnamese and Palestinian solidarity, where the Vietnamese soldier is passing a gun to the Palestinian one, and they're both holding flags. And that was kind of edited and redone to be South Africa passing a key to Palestine with the Palestinian lying on the ground. And there was a lot of discourse around this image because it does portray, and this was at the back of the ICJ hearing, portray the Palestinian struggle as kind of relying on South African forms of resistance, as opposed to Palestinians as liberating themselves and the need for Palestinians to liberate themselves. So yeah, I do think it can be very useful and strategic to draw connections and use similar languages, but there are limits to this. And to view Palestinian resistance through the same lens as the South African resistance tactics, armed and not armed resistance, is limiting. And we can't do this because they're different struggles and there are different kind of technologies and state apparatus oppressing and kind of enacting death in different ways and different extents.
Thank you very much. It's been absolutely a pleasure to speak with you, and I hope you both and everyone down under. Is that something that we can say for South Africa as well? Not really.
Not something we say.
Not something.
That sounds weirdly colonial. We don't like Australia.
Fair enough. I hope that you will take care.
Thank you so much for inviting us to chat and giving us some space to think through these questions with you. It was really great.
Yeah,
Thanks for having us. And thank you, Zandi, as well.
Yeah, thanks, Julia.
We are a beautiful people.